Thank you all for sticking around for the last session of the day. I promise I'll try and keep it as interesting as possible, and then we'll go to a bar. So, yeah, my name's Josh Levenger. I run a digital agency called SpaceDog XYZ. We couldn't get the .com, but I thought we'd be a multi-dimensional digital agency, XYZ, for mission-driven organizations, and I've helped build telephony and online tools for civic engagement and activism all over the world in the last 4 years. So, first, why voter registration? I wouldn't normally have to, this is something that now seems obvious, but in off-election years, this is something that isn't particularly exciting. But in 2016, the election was incredibly close, but if you look at the actual turnout, most people didn't even vote. And there's lots of reasons why they didn't vote. There's barriers that limit turnout and public engagement, but if everybody voted, outcomes would be very different than they were last year. Honestly, it's a question why we really need to register at all. In most advanced liberal democracies, you don't have to register, or you don't have to register with your state. You register with the federal government, so it's a much more simple, uniform process. And honestly, the government already knows where we live. We shouldn't have to give them this information. It's really a bug of our federal system that other advanced liberal democracies don't have. But we can use technology in smart ways to paper over that bug and build new features. I also don't have to tell you why SMS and messaging. SMS is it's an amazing technology. It's seen as an old technology, but in this case, it's really cutting edge. Most organizations that do voter registration do it manually with paper printed forms and ink signatures. Ink signatures are sometimes a legal requirement, depending on the states. Online tools are really seen as like the best in class, and those are honestly like user hostile. They're built by big developers for big contracts, and they're not really built with end users in mind. So on these two projects that I'm about to show, we wanted to build something that was fast, it was easy, it was accurate, and above all, it was actually surprisingly cheap. HelloVote took about 60 seconds to complete in most states, and we could reach out to folks who dropped off, who didn't respond, to get them to re-engage, which isn't something you can do with a web form or with paper. And then what do I know about it? Why am I the person who's talking about this? In 2012, I worked with Rock the Vote to redesign their online registration form. In 2014, I went to Libya and worked on their new democracy systems with Reboot. And in 2016, I worked with Vote.org and HelloVote to build systems here in the US. So I've sort of found a niche in this area. And this is all nonpartisan work, just as a baseline. I really believe everyone should have the ability to express themselves, participate in the democratic process with a small d. So in 2013 and 2014, I worked with the Libyan High National Elections Commission and the International Organization for Migration to help build a modern voting system for their new democracy. Libya is a fairly wealthy, oil-rich country, and they wanted the best technology, and they paid for it to be open source, which was an amazing choice. It was really great working with people in government who wanted to try something new, and a skilled team of technologists and sociologists to design and build it. So a little bit of context to jog your memories. This was 2 years after the revolution and the Arab Spring. Gaddafi had just fallen. There was some threat of violence, but it wasn't yet the civil war and kind of debacle that it is now. This was also before the massive slaughter in Syria. So there's still this really great feeling of civic engagement and participation and really excitement about democracy and where it could lead. You could, though, feel some tremors on the ground. The situation, it turned out not to be as stable as it seemed. So Libya is a fairly wealthy, mobile-enabled society. This is a bumper sticker of somebody's car with an Apple sticker. Mobile phone penetration is over 100%, which means actually lots of people have 2 phones, one for each network. Electronic stores line the road in front of the voter registration office on Gergeris Street. But the second sticker here is of a Tuareg or Berber individual, which is the traditional nomadic peoples in Libya. And they weren't necessarily seen as full citizens or really necessary to engage across language barriers. Most people in Libya speak Arabic. Oil workers, on the other hand, got special registration centers. So that just because SMS can reach everyone didn't mean that actually they intended to reach everyone. So we built a fairly complex system. I won't walk you through this, but I'm happy to talk about it in more detail. We also didn't use Twilio because Twilio wasn't available in the country in 2013, and we had a direct connection to the mobile network operators, or MNOs. We used Vumi, which is an open source messaging broker by the Prekelt Foundation in South Africa, and a custom rapid SMS installation, which is built out by the Cactus Group. And basically the way this giant mess worked is we got CSV exports at some regularity from an Oracle database, which was owned by the Census Authority. And if you were here in this room 3 talks ago, remember all of the talk about how data corrupts, and dead data in particular is really harmful. As a former autocracy, the Libyan government had a ton of information about people. So we didn't need to ask for their birthday or their address. We had their grandfather's name. So all people had to text in, this actually made our UI a lot simpler. So all people had to text in was their family record number, which is basically like your social security number, and the closest polling place, and there were maps of those all over that were distributed by paper. And then we could generate a printed voter roll. Dealing with the PDFs in Arabic wasn't particularly easy. Python has really good Unicode handling in version 3, but doing the ligatures, the kind of squiggles that connect the different characters, is still fairly tricky. So overall, this was like a pretty complex and fragile system, and I was really worried about scalability and reliability, which is what I was brought there to deal with. This is where it was all hosted. This is the Libya Telecom Data Center. It has a dirt parking lot, but it's 36 milliseconds from London. So it has a very good connection to the wider internet, really modern interior, professional staff. The hardware was all set up by some former Googlers and Obama campaign staff, and I mentioned we had a team of engineers from Cactus who were in North Carolina monitoring things from afar, but I was really the only technical person in country. And this was a reminder that the cloud isn't always an option. While from my sort of San Francisco developer mindset, I would say, like, of course we're going to build everything on AWS and Twilio, and it'll scale, and it'll be really easy. But this was a country's national election. They didn't want things owned by American companies sitting off outside of their territory. So I initially thought, local control and ownership of data was like an absolute hard requirement at the beginning. I thought this was a mistake, but this actually ended up saving the project. Yeah, so having physical access to the machines let the system work in a case when the internet actually didn't work. So my worst fear was that the country would get disconnected from the internet, which did end up happening. We were interrupted. We took a Saturday off. We played paintball with some former revolutionaries and a Canadian diplomat, which was like a totally surreal experience. The diplomat's security detail actually didn't join us because they thought they'd be too good, and also they were working. But so then a large crowd shows up at the data center and demands that that the country get disconnected from the internet, because that's the sole point of entrance for the internet to the whole country. The demonstrations were actually part of an oil blockade that sort of split the country between the east, where Benghazi is, and the west, where Tripoli is, and those are sort of the fault lines that the civil war has now devolved into. But the internet was really just leverage for negotiations. We were worried. We got our alerts because I thought all our hosting was down. I thought everything, we were in sort of the midst of crunch mode. It turns out, because everything was hosted locally and our connections to the mobile network operators were local, our system stayed up. Everything was fine. Only our monitoring had gone down because that was all hosted externally. So this is a great lesson in the high-tech solution, not necessarily the right one. The next day, new troops appeared. Libya and Tripoli had been sort of run by different militias. These guys showed up seemingly out of nowhere. Turns out they had been fresh from US training in Sicily. They were deployed around the city. So if you notice their sort of fresh fatigues, their brand new Toyota Hilux, and the tasteful flower in his mounted gun. This guy was just like hanging out on a traffic intersection. And the takeaway here for me was that politics can actually be harder than technology. This was, I approached this as a technical problem, and that's what I was brought in to solve. But the ongoing crisis that unfolded over the next 3 years is not a problem that can be solved with technology. Our technology worked pretty well after 2 months on the ground. Registration closed. We had over 1.5 million people registered out of about 3.4 million eligible. This is a lot lower than actually the election previously, right in 2012, but all of that was done by paper, and the data was just totally unusable. So we unfortunately had to throw all that away and re-register everyone. This is an open data dashboard that I built. It had breakdowns by age, gender, location, constituency. The designs had to work in Arabic and English, and Arabic is a right-to-left language. English is left to right. So all of the designs had to flip, the charts, the tables, and that was a fun challenge. So the situation in Libya didn't go as well as we had hoped, but this is a good reminder for us here in our current political situation that individuals can rise up and topple dictatorships. I think we can learn a thing or two from the Libyan people and the chant that they had in the Arab Spring, that the people demand the fall of the regime. So then in 2016, I worked on a couple of other projects, but this was the other big SMS project I built. We were calling it the world's first national voter registration system, but it was actually the first in America. So here, from one of the world's newest democracies to one of the oldest, open technology helped solve problems, and we can share solutions between environments. There have been small pilots of voter registration technology or SMS voter registration in Austin, Texas, but this was the first sort of national large-scale system in the US. This is a pretty ambitious project by Fight for the Future, which was the organization I was working with. And so here, I'll see if I can play this video. Yes. So this is how it worked. You go to a website, hello.vote, which is still up. And if any of you are not registered to vote, go there now, and you can register during the next slide. So you type in your phone number, you enter, you click text me, it texts you back, and then it has a chatbot functionality that's all powered through Twilio. We set out to build digital native voter registration, not using paper, but using the technology and the place where people live now, which is their phones. So we asked users a series of localized questions, which depend on state and local regulations. And in 13 states, we were able to fill that form out and send it directly to the state using their online system. And in other states where we didn't have that technical or that legal ability, we would generate a PDF with all of the information someone sent us. Then people could print it, sign it, and mail it in. We'd ask people if they had a printer at home, because honestly, I don't know if you have printers at home, but most people don't anymore, or young people particularly don't. So if people didn't have a printer, we'd generate via a cool API from Lob an envelope and just mail it to them. And if people didn't have a stamp at home, we'd also generate that. So we really tried to make this as easy as possible, because the government sure doesn't. So this is some of the flow of how our system worked. People could start the experience from a mobile website or through one of several messaging platforms, Facebook Messenger, Slack, Line, a couple others, and of course, SMS. And so we'd ask the questions sort of conversationally, leading people through what's a fairly boring process in as engaging a manner as we could devise. We'd validate answers as people would send them in. And then if people would drop off, we could send them a reminder a day or an hour or a day later. Our node server handled all of this asynchronous requests with a simple state machine, and we stored data in a JSON blob, which we'd send to our Postgres database. We then passed that to a Python system to actually do the form generation and the PDFs, which used mechanize and requests. We used Redis as a messaging queue. This is all hosted on Heroku, which is great for scaling if you don't care about cost. Sorry, we also used the Twilio messaging and Notify APIs. And Notify was in beta at the time and was really awesome to deal with. So the code, how did this work? The answer is regular expressions. Joke. Now you've got two problems, right? Regular expressions are not machine learning. They are not actually a great way of determining, it's a great way of validating. It's not a great way of figuring out anything else. But it basically took a lot of validation to make the bot look smarter than it really was. Most of our code's just a basic decision tree logic, a lot of regexes. We used open source frameworks where we could, like Moment, to do date formatting so that people could enter April 1st, 1985 instead of 4/1/85. That is my real birthday, so don't steal my identity. We had regular expressions for like every kind of ID that people have. So there's 50 states, 50 different forms of ID numbers. Some states have multiple forms. We also looked up a local weather forecast for Election Day and then sent people an emoji with that, because there's been social science research to indicate that rain and making a rain can decrease turnout, and that making a plan is like the #1 thing that you can ask people to do to actually go out and vote. So we'd use emoji to like kind of hook people in and be cool. The other majority of our code was just like tons of API integrations. Mercifully, most of them were pretty RESTful. So yeah, we used Twilio, Facebook Messenger, Line, which is where a lot of kids hang out. I didn't even know about Line. Slack, Revere Messenger, which is for some big unions, that's where they have their short codes. We use TargetSmart, which is a great source for voter registration data. Voter registration data is public, by the way. Most people don't know this, but your data exists in all sorts of databases. The Google Civic Information API, which had great information on deadlines. TurboVote also had really good information on when early voting starts. We use the PDF toolkit. EasyPost to generate stamps, and Lob, as I mentioned, to send mail programmatically. The code is all available under the AGPL, which is like the most liberal license possible. It's on GitHub. Check it out if you're interested, and I'd be happy to walk you through it. This project like blew up on Twitter. We got way more engagement out of this than I thought we would. And honestly, we used Twitter virality as a media distribution strategy, because we launched in September. The elections, in November. We didn't have a lot of time to build real on-the-ground organizing momentum, so we went basically with a straight online approach. We got retweets from Ellen DeGeneres, Bernie Sanders, Mindy Kaling, Grace Helbig, who's like a huge YouTube celebrity. Chris Sacca in the tech community sort of started a leaderboard where we try to get people to compete with each other. So a couple of the other sharks got in on it. Darth, who, if you're like into weird Twitter, Darth is huge, retweeted us. Jenny Chardin and Cory Doctorow. So a pretty good array of at least sort of the SF techorati. We also got a bunch of press, both through our own press connections and I believe from Twilio. So we got earned and pitched press in a lot of tech outlets and also a fair amount of lifestyle press, including outlets that really cater to the demographics of the folks that I thought would be, or we thought would be likely to use the tool. So that included venues like. You mind if I ask questions? Maybe at the end. I actually won't go 30 minutes, so we'll definitely have time at the end. So yeah, we didn't like explicitly pitch the tool to millennials, but like it's obvious who's going to use an SMS tool to register to vote. So we got coverage in Glamour and Refinery 29 and VentureBeat and Fader. So like a couple of places where that would not traditionally be interested in like the tech angle of this, but in the voting and civic engagement angle of it. MTV even brought back TRL for one day, which is Total Registrations Live, no Total Request Live. They didn't have Carson though. This is Kendall Jenner. She shouted out our shortcode. This is before the Pepsi revolution, so she's gone way more radical now. And then on, we didn't just end with voter reg. We took people all the way through the voting booth on election day. So we sent like tons of actionable reminders. We all know messaging excels at giving people the information they need when they need it. So we would send them notifications of upcoming deadlines. We would send a election day calendar invite that would just load into a Google Calendar or iCal. We'd sent people their polling place location, which we were able to look up from Google Civic, their local weather, as I mentioned. And then on election day, we partnered with an organization called Election Land, which was a collaboration between ProPublica and Medan and a couple of other newsrooms to connect people with journalists in small town newspapers or big town newspapers to report days of or instances of election harassment or the kinds of shenanigans that can happen on election day that if you report them the day after, that coverage doesn't matter. So we really tried to get those stories to people, to journalists, in time for them to be able to do something about it. We also gave people the 1-866 our vote number to connect them directly to a lawyer. And we had pretty high engagement throughout this process. We took users all the way to the voting booth. We encouraged people to take I voted selfies. We had a really nice JavaScript app that generated images like that and tweeted them out. And then I also personally responded to hundreds of emails to team@hello.vote because, as I mentioned, like we had an SMS bot, but for every message we couldn't validate, we would send those into a database and have a human look at them, and that human was me. So that's one part that we didn't automate. So our stats for a 2.5-month project, I thought were pretty impressive. Over 4.5 million messages sent, 600-some thousand web visitors, almost 170,000 users. And then of those users, those are people who who actually started the SMS flow. We got 56,000 new registrations submitted to states and 25,000 registrations checked to see if you're already registered to vote. That's something we could look up. That's a 65% completion rate, which is pretty high for anything on the web, and is actually like incredibly high for something as boring as voter registration. And then in terms of this color scheme is not great for a presentation that's in daylight. But if you look at the graph on the right there, that's our age distribution. And there's a pretty big spike between 20 and 29-year-olds. So shout out to my millennials who actually were the backbone of our tool. And as Ian mentioned earlier in his Call Congress presentation, any map that you show of the United States that's not divided by population is just a population graph. That's exactly what we have for our user base, mostly California and Texas. So some lessons learned from this project. People really do want to register to vote. Despite all of the barriers that are put up in front of them, we had a pretty high completion rate when we reduced that friction. SMS bots are also fairly cost effective, despite having to send or having to pay per message. Although thanks to Twilio.org, we actually got that comped. But if you add up what we would have spent, it cost us about $1 per registration, which is incredibly low compared to traditional methods of canvassing or tabling, which can cost $8 to $20 per completed registration. Other issues. Validation, really important. I know I made a joke about regular expressions, but like that was where we spent the majority of our time. Because people don't actually read the prompts. You know, you're sending them 20 text messages, and they say, you know, I need to see your birth date, and people would say something else in a full sentence. So there's room for improvement there in sending that to a real person and then having them to be able to respond. So lots of questions came in that the bot just wasn't able to answer. There are legal barriers to expanding this all over the US. There are about 30 states that have online voter registration, but we were only able to integrate in 13. In some states, that was due to our lawyers telling us, hey, this isn't a good idea. Because of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, sending information into a system you're not authorized to access can have really high legal consequences. So we only integrated with states where we were pretty sure they wouldn't sue us. Lots of states also have CAPTCHAs to deter bots, which is exactly what we are. Although we were submitting information on behalf of users that was pulled from users basically live, we didn't want to circumvent any CAPTCHAs and put ourselves in further jeopardy. There certainly are ways you could get around this. You could give people a link and tell them to load on their phone and solve the little Google riddle and then send them back, but we decided against doing that. Another thing we learned is that state APIs and data systems, super finicky, not fun to deal with. Pennsylvania actually does have a voter registration API that's controlled by its Secretary of State, but it's a SOAP API, and if you're a developer in the room, you're cringing, and if you're not, let me tell you, it's terrible. I did build an integration to it, but it wasn't approved by them in time for the election, which defeats the whole purpose. Vermont, the state where I'm from, if they know your birth year but not your birthday, they will return your birth date as January 1st in that year, which is a valid date. And so that's pretty hard to determine is invalid. That was a fun thing I learned. Missouri splits their systems across counties. I mean, dealing with 50 states it's just not fun. The other thing I learned is that we didn't need to build a custom bot to do this. The system was, basically we took a prototype and scaled it up. But if I were to do this again, and I'll tell you in a second more things that I'm doing, I would recommend using a system, a pre-built chatbot system like Dexter, which gives really nice node bindings, or Rapid Pro, which is a Python system. So not everything needs to be 100% custom every time. Since the election, I've been working on a couple of new bot experiments for democracy, including using Rapid Pro, which is a really amazing, also open source under the AGPL license system that gives you a really nice GUI for building texting flows. It works with Twilio. It works also with just Android phones. It was built in Uganda and Rwanda for UNICEF, and so it assumes both a different context and less constant connectivity, which is a pretty different, or at least interesting mindset to work with. And I've been testing some of these flows that are much simpler than registering to vote, but simple like check in at an event, call your congressperson. I've been testing flows like this with groups that know how to organize at scale, including Parents Together, who have engaged hundreds of thousands of people around paid leave, the Love Army, which was Van Jones's new dig, and Affinity Works, which is building tools for sort of the unorganized organizers that we've seen since the election, like the women's group huddles and all of that. So again, thanks to UNICEF and the developers in Africa for building this tool and showing us that in the for-profit world that we can have a thing or two to learn from the developing world. So the road ahead is covered in lava. Had the election gone another way, we'd be talking about ways that we could scale this out across the country and integrate with states directly. Unfortunately, that's just not the Justice Department that we're working with any longer. But there are a couple of ways that I think this technology can move forward. One is with human-bot hybrids, as I mentioned earlier, ways to answer complex queries that users are sending in that the regex can't figure out, and then have a human answer that, and then feed that back into a simple AI. Some folks are doing this with using IBM Watson. The group called Our Walmart has built a really cool app to organize workers in Walmarts. It's Organizations United for Respect. They can't have Walmart in the name, but that's the campaign. They have built an app that uses IBM Watson to have basically an FAQ that the AI can answer if it has that information for, which is pretty amazing. We also obviously need to fight back on voting rights. We did have one good Supreme Court decision recently, but there's lots of opportunities for technology to help in this area as well. We need more rapid reporting channels so that issues can be surfaced on the day of, and better ways for rapid legal assistance. The 866 hour vote number, I think, may also be built on Twilio, but they're doing things in still a fairly manual, human way. The organization Medan is doing really great work. They're the ones who built Electionland. Their product is called Check, and it does really great work at real-time multilingual verification of social media events. They also used that in France in the more recent election there, and they got a better result. And then the last thing that we should really fight for, that technology may not be able to do this as well, is a policy goal, which is universal online registration. You shouldn't have to register to vote, right? In most advanced democracies, you don't. I'd love to invent myself out of a job. I don't want to do this anymore. So there are some groups that are pushing this as a policy goal, an organizing goal. Vote.org is one of them. And their proposal is pretty simple. It's to make Election Day a public holiday, and swap it with Columbus Day. Columbus is a racist bastard, and we should celebrate democracy and not colonialism. Makes sense to me. So yeah, I'd like to invent myself out of a job and not have to do voter registration any longer. And I want to leave you with the notion that technology alone really can't solve broken policies. Politics has to do that, and that sometimes we need to get off our desks and out of our chairs and into the streets, like the people of Libya who overthrew a dictator. So this work was all done through Fight for the Future and generously sponsored by Twilio.org, who covered our messaging costs, which made it much more possible to actually do. Thank you very much.